Well, welcome everyone to the Eastside Freedom Library and this special program in conjunction with the tour in defense of Julian Assange. I'm Peter Ratcliffe, the co-executive director here at the Eastside Freedom Library. And I want to especially thank my colleagues, Carla Greeley and Clarence White, for their work on this program today. I also want to thank Women Against Military Madness for their help and indeed their invitation that we host this event. For those of you who don't know about the Eastside Freedom Library, we are in the midst of our 7th year of being in operation. Our mission is to inspire solidarity, work for justice, and advocate for equity for all. We are in the midst of a predominantly immigrant working class neighborhood on the east side of St. Paul, Minnesota. And our primary goal is to work with our neighbors to create bridges for them to share their stories with each other, learn about each other's experiences and ideas, and as we say, hopefully inspire solidarity. When we were offered the opportunity to host our special guests today, John and Gabriel Shipton, who have traveled a great distance to be in the United States and to be with us. We thought it would be productive to have a conversation that included people who are working in independent media here in the Twin Cities. And so we have assembled Petros Haile, and let me read a brief bio of Petros's. He is an Eritrean born and raised in Ethiopia. He's been a community organizer and activist here in Minnesota since 1986. And he's the founder and publisher of African Global Roots, a Pan-African networking and entertainment group. Here is their journal. And we also have with us Cirien Saadeh. Dr. Saadeh is an Arab American journalist and educator who works at the intersections of journalism, social movements, education, and sustainability. She currently serves as executive director for The Uptake, a community news organization based here, and she's an associate faculty member at Prescott College in Prescott, Arizona, where she teaches in their social justice and community organizing program. Cirien also produces and hosts a local radio podcast, The Radical News Hour, currently airing on WFNU in Frogtown. We have my good friend, Sheila Reagan. Sheila is a freelance journalist based here in the Twin Cities. She's covered a wide variety of topics for local publications, including some great writing about theater and the arts. And she's recently been publishing in the Washington Post and the Guardian, and she had a piece in the Guardian yesterday. So our plan for the day is we will hear from John and Gabriel about their tour and Julian Assange's case and where the case is at the moment, and what we all have at stake in this case. And then we will turn to our local independent journalists who will speak about how issues of free press, freedom of speech, interference with media are impacting the work that they're doing here in the Twin Cities. And then we will invite you to type in questions into the chat function on Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook, type into the comment function on Facebook, and we will try to give your questions an airing and a response. So let me turn things over to John and Gabriel. They get to go first because they've come the greatest distance.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here today. Normally Gabriel goes first, but I guess I can go to today. So always in these discourse. It's what to do and what to say looms large, and particularly as what you say relates to what can be done and what has evolved, and the results of that. So to bring us into the continuing present, the results of what has been said in the past and what has been done in the past, and to say something fresh and new. In particular, the revelations of WikiLeaks, they're all held in a library. They're all allegedly provided by Chelsea Manning, covering 5 great important areas. One is the Afghan war files. The other is the Iraq war logs. Then is the diplomatic cables. Then is the Guantanamo Bay files. And finally, Vault 7, which revealed to us the techniques or the engineering that allows CIA and other alphabet agencies, we call them, to confuse, deceive, and overlook all that we do on the internet. The purpose of which, of course, is to model a society allowing the CIA and the State Department in Washington to cause us to think one way when we would be of greater benefit thinking another way. In other words, they divert our energies, the care for our community, the love for our families, and the becoming of ourselves to their own ends and not ours. Cynicism involved is bottomless. Often you will think that a revelation, or if you want to use the term, the revelations of a whistleblower or a leak, often you may say to yourself, oh my God, here we go again. My government has done another heinous crime or a war crime, committed this or committed that. It's just that these constant revelations of governmental misbehavior are onerous and oppressive. And because they're global in their effect, they don't allow me to think clearly about what to do and what can be done and how to discuss it with my neighbours. It's like saying, for example, climate change. It's such a universal concern and anxiety-making statement, anthropometric climate change, that it causes us to reduce our power of action and turn over to government or authority the power to act on our behalf, because we feel uncertain, socially uncertain in ourselves. That can be the result. Take a different approach. For example, the Iraq war files. They revealed to us that 15,000 civilians had been killed. Now, this is burdensome and horrifying. However, the information allows us to go about repairing those circumstances. Another leak in the diplomatic cables. In 2006, some soldiers, now make this point very clearly, when you send soldiers over to another country which is defending itself through IEDs and secretive attacks and snipers, the soldiers become ceaselessly anxious. And the consequence of that, they become unruly and don't follow the rules of engagement, or the rules of engagement are changed to suit the anxiety of the soldiers. That's one. The other point is that to pacify, and that's what the soldiers are there for, to pacify a community, the rules of engagement are encouraged to be utterly ruthless. Now, that's not the soldiers' fault. That's the responsibility of the general staff. So it's not the soldiers' fault. However, the soldiers become unruly. In 2006, they went into a family home just outside Baghdad and murdered all the occupants, the mum and dad, the extended family, the children, the grandfather, grandmother, uncles and aunts. Contemplating this crime, they called in an airstrike and obliterated from the earth all trace of those human beings. When this was revealed in the cables, in the diplomatic cables, a cable went from the ambassador in Baghdad to the State Department. The Iraqi government was able to read it. Having read it, the Iraqi government was able to gather up its courage and refuse to sign and agree to the Status of Forces Agreement, which means a Status of Forces Agreement allows for the occupying soldiers not to be charged under the ordinary laws that govern all other Iraqis. They refused to sign it. As a consequence, the war stopped and the troops were withdrawn. So leaks and whistleblowers can stop wars. Not only that, they can prevent wars. For if we know and knew a little more, if David Kelly, who was one of the weapons inspectors specialising in chemical weapons, revealed to the public on the BBC at the beginning of the march to war organised by Tony Blair. He was later found dead under a tree and considered to be murdered. If that revelation had been published, it would have the fruit that to prevent a war. These people, the Tony Blair government and the Bush government, wanted a war in order to destroy Iraq. People like Rumsfeld saying that, you know, if you've got to make an egg omelette, you break eggs, talking about the slaughter of 1 million human beings, 600,000 human beings, if you take the Iraq war body count number, 750,000 if you take the Lancet. 6 million excess deaths in the Middle East in the last 20 years if you take the research of Gideon Polya, an expert on excess deaths. Mr. Rumsfeld saying, if you're making an omelette, you've got to break eggs. Can you imagine anything more obscene and grotesque, speaking that way about the destruction of a country and the murder of between 600,000 and 1 million people? So the diplomatic cables allow us to get insight into the daily events that govern diplomatic arrangements throughout the world. And we can now, this minute, you can go to your computer, look on your computer, go to WikiLeaks D+, and all of the diplomatic cables will be there, plus in a searchable form, plus all of the diplomatic cables from the 30-year release of the Kissinger cables. You can go and search and have an understanding equal to those people in the State Department and in ambassadors' posts around the world. You can have an understanding equal to theirs. So this pretentiousness that the government goes on that this is a national security matter and we think better about that than you is just a falsity. It's just so that you surrender your sovereignty, your personal sovereignty, your community sovereignty, the sovereignty of your family, the sovereignty of your friends to them so that they can do whatever they like, whatever they comes into them, whatever ridiculous, overweening ambition bites them on the bum that day. Next. It also can bring about justice. So the Guantanamo Bay files allowed the great American lawyer, Clive Stafford Smith. He established an NGO titled Reprieve, and he went with his crew to Guantanamo Bay. There were 22 children in Guantanamo Bay, and he managed to bring about the freedom of many of those so accused. Taken as a whole, the 5 revelations that I mentioned, the Iraq War files, the Afghan War files, taken as a whole, in the fullness of time, it's 10 years, a nation state as rich and gigantic as the United States empire takes a bit of a while to turn around. So taken as a whole, all of those grasped in a single moment, those revelations. 10 years later, we see that they've left Afghanistan. They've left Iraq. They're closing Guantanamo. They're leaving Syria. So you see, grasped as a whole and in the fullness of time, and 10 years is not much in the history of a state, especially one as rich and powerful as the United States. 10 years is not much. Those revelations seeping into the culture of the people of the United States have brought about a fundamental change. Of course, the United States, well, I'll say Washington, because the people of the United States treat me really well. Washington, so that seeping into the culture of the people of the United States, realizing, percolating up into Washington, it percolates up. They're not rainmakers, these people. History exists in us. Percolating up to them, they remove the troops from Iraq, from Afghanistan, discontinue the destruction of those societies, close Guantanamo Bay. So that is the result. That is the wonder of the internet, housing all of those files in D+, WikiLeaks, for us to see at any time and educate ourselves to the level of the State Department diplomats, all of them having a PhD. Why? I mean, a PhD, these people have done 2 things, I'll finish on this, that are really questionable. One is they take to themselves and hold themselves above us and say that we are the holders, we know where the elephants lie down, we know where the source is. We have access to the source. You people, we will guide through the desert across the Red Sea, whatever metaphor that they want to use to separate themselves from us. This is a profound stupidity, moronic beyond belief, for they are part of us. And the education level and the level of culture that we hold within ourselves creates them. And this distinction that they put upon themselves brings them to ruin and us to ruin. It's very clear in the circumstances that the United States finds itself now and its empire as it struggles against what it imagined enemies like China and Russia, and the worldwide distaste and distrust that it's emerged. That's the result of these falsified distinctions between them and us, for they are essentially, fundamentally created by the level of culture and education within us. There's no distinction here. And having made these distinctions for 20 years, they've done, well, let's say, I'll take Oliver Stone's figures. Having made these distinctions for 30 years, they've destroyed 14 countries, squandered $12 trillion, the treasures, the great treasures of the United States, squandered on wars to advance a hegemony which failed, and knowingly, predictably was going to fail. So lastly, I give thanks to the people of the United States who made us welcome, and also to the enculturation that has happened with the revelations from, allegedly from Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, the enculturation which has brought about the end of those wars, occupation, and Guantanamo Bay. I thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Gabriel?
I'm Gabriel Shitton. Maybe I can give you an update of what we're doing here in the USA. My brother Julian is in prison in Belmarsh, just outside of London. It's a maximum security prison, and he's been there coming up. This is his 3rd year of imprisonment in Belmarsh maximum security prison. He's charged basically with publishing. He published what John was talking about, the Iraq war logs, Afghan war logs, the diplomatic cables set, and the Guantanamo Bay detainees files. And under the Espionage Act, he's charged with publishing those and also engaging in what journalists do all the time, and dealing with their sources and publishing information. On January 4th, Julian won his extradition case. The judge rejected the extradition request of the US government, and then the US government instantly appealed. A few days after that, Julian's bail was rejected. So we're in the situation now where Julian won his extradition case 6 months ago, and he is still in a maximum security prison, awaiting an appeal. There's no indication of when or if an appeal will happen. So it's this, just basically extended limbo, that Julian has been in, for going on 3 years. So John and I are here in the US now, campaigning for Julian, the charges against Julian to be discontinued or dropped. We started off with a 17-city tour across the US. We started off in Miami, and then we moved our way around the East Coast. We had, a huge New York event where we had to, expand the tickets 3 times over. A capacity event in Washington, DC, Boston, where we picked up an award for Julian, the Sacco Vincetti Award. We had actions in Philadelphia, and then we in Columbus, in Ohio, Chicago. And now we've made our way here to Minneapolis and St. Paul. What we've seen across the US as we've traveled and done these events is just an outpouring of support for Julian from just ordinary people who have come out to lend their support and let them know that they care about their rights, about not just Julian's predicament, but about their democratic rights, their First Amendment rights, and their freedom of speech rights. We've seen the media there was basically a media, the media wasn't talking about this case at all. And over the past month, we've seen over 20 articles now. In New York Times is talking about Julian's case, USA Today, Newsweek, all these big publications, as well as a lot of independent and smaller publications, local radio stations. We've probably done 10 interviews on local radio stations. We've been on 2 national news programs, all talking about Julian's case and how it is an affront to the First Amendment and the United States Constitution. So as we've been traveling across, we've been talking to people and asking them to stand up for their First Amendment rights, to talk to their Congress people, let them know that they care, that they care about their rights, and that this case, I'm not saying this, but this case, it's been said to be the biggest press freedom case since the Pentagon Papers. So it's the first time the 1917 Espionage Act has been used in this way against a publisher to stop them, to make an example of them, to show everybody that if you publish this sort of information, this is what's going to happen to you. Back to you now.
Great, thank you.
No
Thank you
worries.
both very much. Cirien, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I want to be really clear that I can speak from the perspective of being a community journalist here in the Twin Cities, as the executive director of a very small nonprofit, and as somebody who thinks a lot about what does it mean to do this work for the historically underserved and historically marginalized communities that I represent and that I seek to build power in and with. I cannot speak to the sort of international and national ramifications of this. But what I can talk about in my own perspective is that we see attacks on freedom of the press at all levels. And we see it in a lot of ways that maybe we might not expect. I know as somebody who runs a nonprofit and has been fiercely critical of the so-called nonprofit industrial complex, that while we might not see that as a sort of traditional attack on freedom of the press, in many ways it does. It controls so much of our capacity to operate. I think a lot about the ways in which there is deep tension between the legacy media and independent media, and really not a sense of solidarity between those two groups. I think a lot about the ways in which we are under-resourced as organizations and unable to take those big steps and unable to step into these conversations. And so I just want to recognize that I can speak from a very limited perspective. And I also want to honor what John said about PhDs. As a PhD holder, by and large, as a system, excuse my language, we kind of stink. It is very much a group of people that create separation, that talks about them over others. And I want to be really clear in saying that journalists do the same thing. Journalists absolutely do the same thing, where they talk about themselves as having special knowledge or special access. And that creates a deep chasm of distrust, which makes it really easy for people to not want to stand up for local media or any media, because we're not doing our jobs as system actors to build that trust and to build those relationships and to show the purposes of our work.
Sure, please.
Yeah, so I'm pleased to hear what you were saying, that there's more of the media coverage of this issue. And I wonder, just as you were saying that, if there's a correlation between, oh, maybe we should cover the Julian Assange case and the fact that these revelations have come out about the New York Times and the Washington Post being basically under attack by the federal government, and then being told that they can't talk about the fact that they've been spied on. And now we just, in this last week, the ProPublica did the sort of bombshell reporting about the amount of taxes that rich people are having to pay. And we've got the Attorney General saying, well, we're going to go after whoever leaks that information. I think that there is perhaps, and also we have like a huge lawsuit here in Minneapolis with journalists saying we were, attacked when we were trying to cover the protests that happened here after the death of George Floyd a year ago, and then subsequently. So I think that there perhaps is an awareness that's happening, that there's been a disparagement of news and media, and they've been kind of put as the enemy in so many ways. And meanwhile, we have all these newspapers closing right and left. And maybe that's not such a good thing. So I'm a freelance journalist. I don't belong to any particular publication. I'm not on staff anywhere, but something I think about a lot. I am on the board of Public Record Media, and we do a lot of FOIA requests and government records requests in Minnesota, and it's an ongoing battle, and one that feels like it gets more difficult as time goes on.
So Petros?
Mine could be a bit different in some sense, but I like what you said, Nix, and whistleblowers can prevent war. Recently, as recent as 3 months ago, there was a war between Ethiopia within their own ethnic rivalry. One of the things is Eritrea got involved without declaring to the international community. So it was exposed because of the social media, and many organizations who reported Eritreans' involvement in the war. So Eritrea admitted finally, and they said they're leaving, but they're still there, they're deep into the conflict. So my organization, we have a TV station here under Patrick TV, called Eritrean Affair. We do our part. One thing that I wanted to mention is some of the things that we're talking about within an authoritarian regime in our country is totally totalitarian, no fundamental rights. So the only thing is outside of Eritrea, anything we do is outside of Eritrea. So there's over 40 or 50 media outlets, thanks for the social media. And we're doing our part locally here in Minnesota. Program that we expose every activity. One of the ugliest parts that the government did is during 9/11, September 11, within that week, he imprisoned 15 journalists in Eritrea, and they're still in jail for the last 20 years, and nobody knows what they are. Some of them are thought to be dead, but no relatives visit them. Also, political dissidents, the so-called Group 15, they call them G15. Again, they were in jail within that week, that September 11, 9/11, and nobody knows where they are. Most of them are presumed to be dead. So this is how it is. The only crime that the journalists did was they interviewed those dissident groups, Christian groups. So it's pretty much, that's an African way, so to speak, where there's no democracy, there's no human rights. Although human rights, Amnesty International, Al Jazeera, BBC reported it from time to time, but nothing happened so far.
So I want to invite the people who are watching, if you have questions or comments, please type them in, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook. I also want to mention that there will be an event this evening at 7 if you are watching from within the general area. There will be an in-person event at 7 o'clock tonight at the Highland Park Pavilion. I want to sort of throw a question to all of you. I so appreciated, John, particularly your comments, and you said that the way that the media has itself been attacked and delegitimized, that it makes many people who look to the media for information, as you said, we feel uncertain in our souls. That it's not just a question of access to information, but also how it undermines the confidence that our neighbors, that we ourselves might feel to take action, to make change. And so I wanted to ask any or all of you about your relationships with the people who are listening to your radio show, reading your articles, or watching your television programs. How are you feeling about how they are feeling about their access to knowledge and their opportunities to take action to change their lives for the better? Cirien, please.
I think a lot about the rise in conspiracy theory culture. I think that independent journalism needs to have a code, and so often we see people stepping into YouTube and podcast spaces and bringing those conspiracy theories to light and not really giving them context or sharing this sort of fake news. And that has got so much more power because the codes that journalists, whether independent or legacy, live by have been delegitimized, whether externally by government actors or even internally. I think a lot about the ways in which the values or so-called values of objectivity are used to kind of keep journalists from stepping into the fray and saying, we're going to be really transparent about where this comes from and the ways in which that's being used against us. And I really am scared about conspiracy theory culture. That scares me because I'm seeing, I mean, and not just when we talk about things like COVID or anything else, but just the ways in which it means communication is it's almost impossible to have two-way communication right now because people are learning from completely different schools of thought, not just textbooks. I think a lot about right now, critical race theory is something that I think has a lot of pertinence to the discussions we have. It's something we should be teaching. It's something I specialized in as a academic and in my work. And I think the fact that so many are banning that discussion, it scares me because it means that we're going to have, I mean, in Minnesota, for example, if we've got Minneapolis and St. Paul and some of the inner ring suburbs making sure to center a critical race theory discussion, and we've got parts of rural Minnesota banning that discussion, then we're going to have an electorate that is not even in the same pedagogy, let alone, or speaking the same language. I mean, that's scary. And again, I think it comes from attacks on the media, attacks on academic, schools and academia. It comes from all these, and that's scary. It honestly scares the heck out of me.
Anyone else on what you see the impact and what you're hearing from people who are listening, reading. John, please.
Well, Gabriel and I sort of, we're in this, not quite the center, but very close to the center of a hurricane vortex where you constantly come across people who are dissatisfied in one way or another with the actions of government, and why shouldn't they be? And the stream of ideas is, has multipolarity and great variety. These will settle out because the media has undergone affiliation. Legacy media has undergone affiliation to government. That's clear. There's never a war they don't like. Whereas social media, it has a beauty, a great beauty. So you take Facebook, this is a phenomenon of Facebook, not speaking of, or other, not the management. The management class just affiliated with certain aspects of government. Leave them out. The beauty of Facebook is that we put pictures of our kids up. We talk about what we're going to do. We get groups together. We discuss ideas, and the flow of information can be pretty constant, and hints at erudition, which you can follow up to the level of your curiosity and time. It has a great beauty. And also it has the flaws and the beauty of being human. So sometimes we preach about somebody else and say, well, don't cut your front lawn or something, some silliness that we go on. Suddenly we bitch about each other, and that's fine because it, the tensions, the communal tensions need communal space to flow out and amalgamate if necessary. If amalgamation is necessary, but they need a space to flow out. So it's very beautiful, those things, and there are many of them now. I think there are 9 social media outlets. So that's one. The other one is that with the failures of government policies in so many areas, in neoliberalism, the wars that I spoke of previously, and the support government has received and continues to receive from legacy media, that, and our understanding, the distinction of our understanding. So, for example, we lived in the Haitian quarter down in Miami, and people bring home women bring home the shopping in a supermarket trolley, and you hear it rattling down the street. There's dead cars everywhere. On Saturday and Friday night, they get very enthusiastic and fire pistols or shotguns into the air, like that. But then you go uptown to Miami and you see riches unparalleled, but compressed. But riches, you just put extraordinary wealth beyond comprehension. Streets lined with gold. So we know those 2 items, characters, are in tremendous tension with each other, and one only comes at the expense of the other. We know that. However, when we look at the newspapers or watch TV, they carry on about some dispute or other, but nowhere do we see, oh, this is a situation where there's 40 million people on food stamps, the tensions that's creating in the society, the adoption of what you might call unfounded conspiracy theories as to why it's happening, the adoption of those. And on the other hand, wealth has this almost bulletproof perimeter that we find hard to analyze unless you really psychopathologically curious. So really hard to analyze, and that tremendous tension between those two things provokes us to cause a miasma of disbelief. But that's what happened. But I have no criticism of the phenomenon of people manifested in social media. It's quite wonderful for human beings to exchange ideas, photographs of the kids, picture of a puppy dog, their plants and so on. It's great.
Sheila, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. That before we started the conversation, you told me that you had covered a Trump rally or a Trumper rally in Wisconsin yesterday.
It was a week ago.
A week ago.
Yeah.
And the complexities that raised for you.
Yeah, so the thing is that relates to what you were saying. So this, in terms of conspiracy theory, particularly the particular conspiracy, or like to be less political about it, the people that believe that the 2020 election was stolen. And because of what happened on January 6th, many of those people that were saying about the voting machines, etc., got deplatformed, including Donald Trump, including Mike Lindell, many voices got banned from Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and Google, and they just got deplatformed across the board. So what we have right now is these alternative platforms that are popping up that are like Rumble and like these other sort of sites, like apps that people are going to for their news. It's completely separate source of information, source of networking, source of everything. And so, it was, and when I was talking to people at this rally, interestingly, people wanted to talk to me. Some people wouldn't, but they had no problem telling me about what they truly believed, which was that China hacked the voting machines and produced the election results, and various other, beliefs. And meanwhile, the people that were up on stage were talking about how horrible journalists are, and it was a little bit scary actually, like doing these interviews, and like there was just like such a negative, rhetoric about news media. And I did have one person like scream at me and tell me to get away from her, and I had to go hide in the media tent for a while. So anyway, it's just I think that it has escalated. The distrust of the media has escalated so much, especially with the deplatforming of certain voices, that the schism is growing even wider than it was before, and it's even harder for the journalists to be able to present the news, for people to trust institutions like the media, like the CDC, like these things that in the past, who would have thought that we wouldn't believe what the director of the CDC told us was primary public health information. But now we are in a situation where people do not believe that top health person. So how do we fix it? I do not know.
Well, that's a good lead into the first question that's come in from folks out there watching. And that is there a shifting sense that legacy media and citizens journalism are becoming more respectful of each other, given some of the realities of social media, and particularly things like the awarding of an honorary Pulitzer to Darnella Fraser. Does that, I think it's worth it. Why did that happen? What does that indicate? Cirien, I can see on your face, please say something.
First of all, let me say that I really hate the word citizen journalism.
Uh-huh.
And this is somebody who used to run an organization that really prided itself on its citizen journalism. I think it's a very exclusionary term, and it leaves a lot of undocumented people and people without citizenship out of the conversation. So I want to replace that word with independent and community journalism, because I just think that's a much more inclusive conversation to be had. I don't think it's a growing respect or understanding. And I also think that Darnella Fraser, as a separate note, should be held up. And I think awarding a Pulitzer to somebody who was witnessing somebody be murdered, yes, it was life-changing. And I also think it's a distraction from the failures of media to report on things like the murder of George Floyd or the death of Daunte Wright or anything else. And I think it shifts the responsibility to say, oh, look, she did the job, they did the job. We can count on citizen journalism or community journalism to stand up without actually looking internally at the mistakes that we make in the field. I think that I'm seeing maybe less of a growing understanding or respect and more of a growing admission that we're all here to stay. And I think we're seeing more and more resources going into community and independent media. And I'm seeing that be very frustrating to legacy media who want to know why we get the grants or why the sponsorship happens or any of those things. I think there's that sort of, how can we adopt what they're doing? So we're seeing a lot of legacy media, for example, become 501c3 nonprofits, which is a structure that's very traditional to independent community media. And I think that there is this sense that we in some ways have to learn from each other's playbook if we're going to be able to operate. But I think there are some community journalists and community journalism organizations that are kind of lauded as we like what they're doing. But I think by and large, it's more of, I guess we're just going to have to deal with each other. For a long time, I was the youngest person in the Capitol press room here in the Minnesota State Legislature, back when I was an intern, back when I was 20 years old. And I could never get a question in because I was always the young kid at the back of the room. And now it's a lot easier for me to get a space at that table because it's just sort of like, she's not going to leave us alone, or they're just going to be here. So we got to deal with it. And so I don't know if that's respect. I don't know if it'll lead to respect, but I do think it's nice to just not be ignored anymore, which is nice in and of itself.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please.
I think since WikiLeaks has been around since 2006, and what WikiLeaks sort of model, like the sort of underlying idea was to have the source documents available to everybody, not just legacy media or corporate media, but also independent media, independent journalists, and even real people, and give them the opportunity to make decisions based on informing themselves, educating themselves, to make better lives for themselves. So if you take, if you go along and you follow, the trajectory of WikiLeaks and independent journalism, WikiLeaks really opened up journalism for independent journalists. They were able to, leaks were basically, monopolized by legacy media. Like all the biggest leaks happened through legacy media, and independent journalists weren't able to, they could report on the reportage, but they couldn't, access the leaks and things themselves. So it was all seen through a very, a small lens. But after WikiLeaks, then, the releases were open to everyone as an archive. So you had journalists all around the world, looking into these files, from, in Tunisia, they found a cable that showed that the Tunisian leader didn't have the support of the US government, and that led to them being overthrown. So, it's these sort of, this open source or like crowdsourced journalism that sort of given rise and to more and more independent journalism.
And I think just to go back to, how do we build trust? I mean, that is, you're not just saying opinions, you're not just saying, oh, this is the way it is. You're actually providing the source material, which is a way to build trust with, saying this is true.
Yeah, and I think a lot of trust was lost, especially around the Iraq War period, where those lies were propagated to enter that war, and so then all these leaks and things came out related from those lies and those wars, and people were able to see through, what the media was complicit in these sort of things, and so a lot of trust was lost in the media, especially in legacy institutional media. So, that they have to work to earn it back. Otherwise, independent media will just keep growing and growing, and their audience share will just shrink and shrink.
Coming from a very different angle, you're talking about an existing institution of media, so to speak, a lesser of two evils. But I came from a country where there is no private media. So the only media that they have is the government media. And, the only radio, there's only one radio, one newspaper, and almost no social media. That's why I was trying to say that's totally a totalitarian regime. So after I came here, yes, I can see that the diversity of medias, even from independent, you can classify them by being liberal, conservative, and all that stuff. Unfortunately, we don't have that luxury in Eritrea. It was strictly the worst place to be in for journalists. Just like I said, they were in jail for 20 years, still there, and nobody knows whether they're still alive or not. So I can see, I can be to look at things from a very critical point of view. That I spent so much time exposing the tyrants in Eritrea. So it was just, I can see that we need to be there. As Eritreans, we need to get one day, we can say that we have 10, 15 private medias where we can compare one from the other. But that lecture,
I think there's this interesting, or it's not interesting, it's horrible, but what's happening with Julian's case is it's being held up by these totalitarian regimes and authoritarian regimes. So when they're confronted about journalists being imprisoned or tortured in their countries, like Azerbaijan, Aliyev, he was confronted like, what your freedom of press is horrendous. You torture journalists, you jail journalists. He answered back to the BBC reporter, well, you can't lecture me. Look at what you're doing to Julian Assange. The Chinese foreign affairs spokesperson, they were confronted about their press freedoms in China. And they responded, you can't lecture us. Look what you're doing. You've got a journalist, a publisher in jail in the UK. The UK Russian ambassador was confronted about Navalny. He said, you can't say anything to us about Navalny because down the road, you've got a publisher and journalist in prison as well. So I think Julian's predicament and his fight is something that, if something is done about it, if his prosecution is discontinued, it sends a message all around the world to these places where, that places that don't have the rights that we have, the United States government can then, take the moral high ground when pressuring these places to have, more open press, more human rights, more press freedom, because at the moment, they just have this Assange problem.
So I want to tell one story, and actually about a project that was researched here and has just reached culmination. And that is 2 high school seniors were doing a National History Day project. And they had learned about, and someone I knew nothing about, an African-American woman named Ethel Payne, who was the first Black woman in the White House press corps. And she had come from the Chicago Defender. Maybe in some ways, the Chicago Defender is the equivalent of what we're calling community journalism and independent journalism at that time. In 1954, to go to Washington, D.C. And she immediately got into an ongoing argument with President Eisenhower about why was Eisenhower advocating for the development of an interstate highway system without including a regulation that there could not be Jim Crow transportation in the federal highway system. And so, you know, like Cirien saying about being in the room and how people see, here is the first Black woman to be accepted into the White House press corps, and she immediately starts a fight. And she takes an issue that would affect people all over the United States, including here at the time of the building of Interstate 94 and the destruction of the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul. And here are these 2 17-year-old white high school kids creating a 10-minute documentary video about Ethel Payne. And they won first prize in the state of Minnesota. Their video has now been shown at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And they've taken 6th prize nationally. I need to know what prizes 1 through 5 were about, because I can't imagine how it could get any better than that. But, you know, the idea of journalists as fighters, as journalists as taking risk, journalists as standing up for what they think is right. There's a good long history of that around the world, not just in the United States. And I'm thrilled that these kids found the resources here at the Eastside Freedom Library to tell that story. So please, Cirien.
Will you share the link with that to us?
Oh, sure. I've posted it on our Facebook page.
Really on.
But sure, no, I'll send you the link. It's the best 10 minutes you'll spend.
Sure.
Yeah. So I want to maybe close with this question that's come in from one of our viewers to John and Gabriel. And it's a good time for us here and people watching to think about this. What's the most important thing that you think that we can do here in Minnesota to further Julian's cause? And what can we be doing to open more doors for more journalists?
So what we've been talking to people about doing all over the country is just, you know, getting in touch with their Congress people and telling them, you know, that they care about this case, that you know, that they care about their First Amendment rights, their democratic rights, they care about their press freedoms, and that they want, you know, they want their Congress people to do something about it. I think that's what we sort of, you know, we find that, you know, if people can work locally and achieve something locally, then you know, you get much better momentum, things like that. One example was in Australia. There was an electorate or a district, and they got a local petition together. And in Australia, we've got a support Assange parliamentary group. So there's 26 MPs actually, parliamentarians who are in a group that support you know, the dropping of the charges against Julian. And this petition was to petition a local member to join that group. And, you know, so the petition was put together locally, put in local businesses. They got people together I think it was like 500 or 600 signatures, and they gave that to the MP, and then that MP then joined the Support Assange group. So they now have that petition, they now have that grouping of all the numbers and people on that thing, so now they can organise locally and for other issues or even further pushing for Assange to be free. So that was one sort of example that it's interesting on. It doesn't take much to move things, with your neighbours and friends. I think that's the.
What was it, the local constituents of the representative?
Yes, so it was a local constituents. So it's people from that electorate, or districts, I think you call them here, congressional districts. Yeah.
The other with journalism, the journalist will rise up to the challenge as we do, and use facilities like Patreon or Substack. That will create space and enthusiasm and movement for journalists, so they get a little bit of money, carry another investigation, publish that. There are many. Substack, I know because I read it each day of the Greenwald, and Patreon, I read for a couple of other writers. Medium, I also read. So there's 3 avenues for encouragement and creation, deeper, more, well, that's insulting, a deeper and vigorous journalist class.
Thank you. So we'll wrap up. I want to encourage everyone to follow up, to listen to Radical News Hour on KFNU. WFNU, Frogtown Radio, and also The Uptake, to look for Sheila's byline, whether it's in The Guardian or something much closer to home, to read African Global and follow Petros's work in the diasporic East African community. And if you're available this evening, come and listen to more of John and Gabriel and talk as they talk about Julian's case. And follow us at the Eastside Freedom Library. Maybe I'll end with this. Tomorrow night, we will be hosting Professor Carlos Hill, who was a student of mine more than 20 years ago and is now chairperson of African American Studies at the University of Oklahoma, and has just published a book on the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. And I continue to say that it's a very significant thing that President Biden went to Tulsa and explicitly said that what had happened in Tulsa 100 years ago was not a riot, but that it was a massacre. And I think to some degree, all of us up here believe that words matter, and the choice of the word massacre as opposed to the use of the word riot is very significant. And it didn't happen by accident. It's been years of some of those shady people with PhDs that we've been talking about, and others who have said, you can't call this a riot, this was a massacre, and you should pay attention to it. So tomorrow night, Carlos Hill will be with us with his new book on Tulsa. He will be with us, of course, virtually. But tune in and continue to follow our work here at the Eastside Freedom Library. Thank you, Carla and Clarence, for your work on this. And again, thank you to our colleagues at Women Against Military Madness for making this event possible. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Tough in the trail. Outside.
Everything has to be outside.